I've never been able to explain what happened that day in a way that satisfies anyone else. Hell, it still doesn't quite sit right with me. I've thought about it more times than I can count, trying to piece it all together, going over every detail like I'm gonna find something new the 100th time around. I never do. All I know for certain is this. A stray cat guarded me while I was alone on a giant rock in the middle of nowhere, and I still don't understand why. It was the summer I took 2 months off work, packed up my beat-up hatchback, and drove west from Colorado into Utah, then north toward Idaho. I didn't have much of a plan, just a list of trailheads, a few topographic maps, and a need to get as far from everything as I could. Life had been loud that year. Too many people, too many obligations, too much time looking at screens and not enough time feeling the wind or standing still in a quiet place. That's how I found myself in a stretch of high desert foothills in central Idaho. Not a major park or landmark, just a vast sprawl of public land tucked between 2 state routes. It was dry country, low shrubs, sandstone ridges, scattered clusters of pine in the higher elevations. I'd heard from a guy at a gear shop in Pocatello that there was a good loop out there if you didn't mind some bushwhacking and a few old cattle fences. That's all I needed to hear. I parked off a dirt road that showed more elk prints than tire tracks, shouldered my pack, and set out around noon. It was early July. Sun was high, air was dry, and the silence out there was thick enough to feel. After a couple hours of steady hiking through juniper and sagebrush, the land rose into a mix of red rock and rolling gullies. No trails, just game paths and erosion cuts. I picked my way up one of the rocky ridges and followed it until it leveled out onto a wide, flat slab of sandstone that jutted out over a shallow ravine. It looked like a giant stone balcony built by nature. I decided that was where I'd camp. The rock was flat and clean, maybe 50 feet across, with just enough space on one side for a bivy sack and my small cooking kit. Best of all, I could see for miles from up there. To the north, dusty ridgelines layered like old folded paper. To the south, the long dry spine of the land unrolled all the way to the horizon. No roads, no people, no noise but the wind. I dropped my pack and sat down, legs stretched, back against a warm chunk of stone. I stayed that way for a long time, doing nothing, just letting the stillness soak in. That was why I came out here, to feel small, invisible, unplugged. After an hour or so, I set up my bivvy and ate a meal of crackers, jerky, and trail mix. I watched the sun drop behind the distant hills and let the air cool around me. Then I saw the cat. It was just before dusk. I had been scanning the edge of the ridge when something moved along the far side of the slab, near a break in the rock where a few scraggly bushes clung to cracks. A small animal, low to the ground, moving with fluid control. It was a cat, not wild but clearly feral. Short fur, dark orange, maybe a little tabby striping across its back. Lean body, long tail, pointed ears alert. It didn't slink or dart like a cat afraid. It walked slowly and deliberately across the rock, stopping about 20 feet from me and sitting down with its body facing me, but its eyes scanning the land beyond me. First I thought it was just curious. Maybe it smelled the food. But it didn't come closer, didn't sniff around or look at my gear. It just sat there, calm but alert, ears twitching slightly in the wind. I stayed still. I didn't try to get its attention. I figured if it wanted to leave, it would. But it didn't. When the sun was gone and the land cooled fast, I crawled into my bivy sack, zipped it up around my chest, and lay back with the cat still there. Same spot, same posture. I watched it until the stars were out. Then I drifted off. I woke once in the night to the sound of something moving in the brush below the rock. Sharp, erratic steps, maybe 30 yards off. I didn't sit up, just stayed still and listened. The cat was still there, too. I could barely make out its silhouette against the moonlit rock. It hadn't moved much, but I noticed its body had tensed slightly, front legs stiff, ears fixed in the direction of the noise. The sound came and went. A few crunches of dry leaves, a shift of gravel, then silence. I stayed awake for another half hour, then fell back asleep. In the morning, I sat up slowly, expecting the cat to be gone. But it wasn't. It had moved maybe 10 feet closer in the night, now sitting a few paces from where I slept, still facing outward, still quiet, still watching. I didn't know what to make of it. I wasn't afraid, but I was confused. Why hadn't it left? Why had it moved closer? It didn't seem injured. It didn't look hungry. It didn't seem tame either. It kept its distance and never once looked me in the eye. It didn't make a sound. I ate breakfast with the cat still sitting there. The wind picked up a little, blowing dust off the flat rock, and the cat didn't flinch. It was like a statue. Eventually, I packed up my gear. I didn't plan to stay another night, but I wanted to explore the ravine below the slab before heading back to the car. I hiked down through a steep cut in the rock, dropping maybe 30 feet into a narrow channel lined with loose stone and dry branches. The air was cooler down there, and the silence deeper. The walls on either side rose up high and close, like a dry hallway carved by wind. About 10 minutes in, I found something that made me stop. It was a small clearing, flat earth, hard-packed dirt. In the center was the decomposed body of a mule deer. Fresh, but not fresh enough. No major rot yet, but the skin was gone in patches and the eyes had been taken. Bones exposed along the legs, ribs splayed. But that's not what made me stop. It was the way the carcass was placed. Not dragged, not half-eaten. It was laid out, front legs extended, head turned slightly to the side, body aligned with the narrow floor of the ravine. There were no drag marks, no obvious signs of a struggle, just the dead deer, neatly positioned like it had been placed there. I backed away slowly, not because of the deer, but because of what I felt in that moment, like I was being watched. Not the kind of vague paranoia you get when you're alone in the woods. This was pointed, focused. I scanned the canyon rim above but saw nothing. Then I noticed something else. Tracks. Not cat tracks. Not deer. Something else. Bigger than a dog's, but not as wide as a bear's. The paw prints were deep and spaced out. Whatever made them was heavy. They circled the deer once, then vanished into a pile of rocks along the canyon wall. I didn't stay to study them. I turned around and climbed out of the ravine fast, heart pounding harder than the effort should have called for. I made it back to the slab by mid-morning. The cat was gone. I waited another hour, half expecting it to return. Didn't. The hike back to the car took less time than I remembered. I didn't stop to rest. Every few minutes I looked behind me. The landscape was as silent as ever, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been close to something I didn't understand. Something that killed cleanly. Something that placed its kill with intention. I made it back to the car without seeing another living soul. I drove an hour east, pulled into a gas station, and sat in the lot for a long time with the engine off. That night, I stayed in a motel. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and thought about the cat. How it sat so still. How it never once looked at me directly. How it watched the dark hills around me like it was waiting for something to come closer and daring it to try. I never saw it again. I've told myself a dozen things since then. That it was a fluke. That the cat was just a random stray. That the deer had been killed by a mountain lion and I just got spooked. That I imagined the symmetry of the kill site. That the prints were a trick of erosion. But even now, years later, I'm not sure I buy it. Because the thing that sticks with me more than anything else isn't what I saw in the ravine. It's how the cat acted before I went down there. Like it knew something was nearby. Like it had taken it upon itself to stand guard while I slept. Not as a pet, not out of loyalty, but like something older, something deeper, like instinct. Whatever was out there that night, whatever took the deer and left no trace, never reached me. And I don't think that was an accident. I think that stray cat knew. And I think, for reasons I'll never understand, it decided to protect me. Even now, when I hike alone and stop for the night in the middle of nowhere, I sometimes think back to that slab of stone, that stretch of Idaho hills, that silent animal standing between me and the dark. And I wonder what would have happened if it hadn't. I was 24 when it happened, young enough to think I had everything figured out, old enough to feel ashamed that I didn't. That summer, I left a job I hated in a city that didn't feel like home. I had some savings, not much, but enough to stretch across a few months if I lived cheap. I packed up my old hatchback, grabbed my gear, and hit the road with the loose plan of hiking through some of the national forests out west. I told myself it was for clarity, some quiet time in nature to sort things out. But deep down, I think I just wanted to disappear for a while. I started in Oregon, worked my way down through Northern California, and eventually found myself in Shasta Trinity National Forest. It was late August by then, still hot during the day but cool at night. I was camping and hiking solo, sticking mostly to less popular areas where I could move without running into crowds. That was the whole point for me, to get far away from people. There's a trail system west of Mount Shasta that doesn't get a lot of foot traffic. Some of the paths are overgrown, others aren't marked on most of the public maps. I'd gotten a rough guide from an old ranger station and decided to take a 3-day loop through that part of the forest. It was supposed to be about 25 miles, mostly flat terrain, with some smaller climbs on the second day. I started early, hiking a few miles in the first day and setting up camp beside a shallow stream. The area was peaceful, not much wildlife beyond birds and squirrels. No cell service, no noise, just the steady rush of water and the creak of trees in the wind. I slept well that first night, tucked in my tent, with the stars visible through the mesh ceiling. The second day was longer. I woke up, made coffee, packed my gear, and pushed deeper into the forest. The trail was harder to follow the further I went. Some sections had clearly been swallowed up by undergrowth, others vanished entirely into the trees. I was using a compass and topo map, checking my bearings every hour or so. I wasn't worried. I'd done worse trails and I'd trained myself to read terrain pretty well. Around mid-afternoon, I stopped for water at a small clearing and saw something strange. A ring of stones, arranged in a perfect circle. It was about 5 feet across. 12 stones total, placed in even intervals. Not natural, not like a rock fall or some animal scattering pebbles. This was deliberate. The stones were smooth and flat, each one about the size of a loaf of bread. No moss, no dirt on them, like they'd been placed recently. I stood over it for a while, then stepped around and kept going. I figured it might have been a marker or some kind of old spiritual thing. People do weird rituals in the woods sometimes. I didn't want to mess with it. By the time I made camp that night, I'd covered close to 10 miles. I found a level spot between 2 old growth pines and set up the tent quickly. My legs were sore. I ate a cold dinner, just some dried fruit and peanut butter on tortillas, and sat with my back against a log while the light faded. That's when I saw them. At first, I thought it was a trick of the shadows, but as my eyes adjusted, I noticed small shapes moving through the low brush. They were quiet, almost silent, but they moved with purpose. I counted 4 of them at first, little black bodies the size of rabbits, long thin legs, gliding over the leaves. Spiders, not the tiny kind that dart around your kitchen. These were big, maybe 4 or 5 inches across if you included the legs. Black or dark brown, low to the ground, with a jerky but careful way of moving. They didn't come toward me, they just moved around the outer edge of the clearing. I stayed still, not wanting to attract attention. More of them showed up over the next hour. I counted at least a dozen, maybe more. They didn't get closer than 15 feet. They stayed in a loose ring around my camp. Not hunting, not wandering, just staying there, watching. Eventually, I crawled into the tent and zipped it tight. I didn't sleep well. Every noise outside made me tense up. I kept thinking one would find its way inside through a gap or small tear in the mesh, but none of them did. The next morning, I stepped out cautiously. They were gone. No sign of them. Not one. I checked the perimeter. No webs, no legs, no movement in the underbrush. Just trees and fallen pine needles. I broke camp quickly and got moving. That day's hike was harder. The trail cut across a ridge with steep drop-offs, and the soil was dry and crumbly in places. I kept checking my back, half expecting to see those spiders again. But the woods were quiet. Around mid-afternoon, I heard something else, something bigger. It started as a distant rustling, then heavier footsteps, not the fast scurry of a deer, not the bounding of a rabbit. Something slower, intentional. I stopped and crouched low, ears tuned. Silence. Then another step. Closer. I couldn't see anything, but I knew I wasn't alone. Something was moving parallel to me, just beyond a thick patch of underbrush. I stayed still for maybe 10 minutes. Nothing came out. No more sounds. Eventually, I started walking again, and that's when I noticed it. Another ring of stones. Smaller this time, maybe 3 feet across. Same style, 12 smooth stones arranged in a perfect circle. It wasn't on the trail. It was tucked about 10 feet off to the right, half hidden under some ferns. I walked past it without stopping. I didn't like how it felt. That night, I camped on a small rise near a dried-up creek bed. No fire, no cooking. I just ate a granola bar and crawled into the tent before dark. I kept the zipper tight and tried not to think about the footsteps or the stones. But sleep didn't come easily. In the middle of the night, I woke up to movement again. Not close this time, but not far either. I turned on my headlamp and looked through the mesh. The spiders were back. Dozens of them. They weren't on me. They weren't crawling on the tent. They were sitting still, legs folded low, bodies close to the ground, lined up in a loose ring around my campsite. Each one about 10 to 15 feet apart, facing outward, guarding. That word came into my mind out of nowhere. Guarding. Not hunting, not waiting, not stalking. Guarding me. I didn't move. I barely breathed. I turned off the light and lay in the dark, heart racing, every sense stretched thin. They stayed that way until the first pale light of morning began to filter through the trees. When I stepped outside after sunrise, they were gone again. Same as before. No trace. I finished the loop that day, made it back to my car by late afternoon. My boots were soaked. My back ached, but I kept moving until I was back on the highway. I didn't sleep that night. I checked into a cheap motel just outside Reading, took a long shower, and sat on the bed with the lights on. I couldn't stop thinking about them. The way they formed that perfect outer circle, always facing away from me, and I kept thinking about the footsteps I'd heard. The quiet, heavy pacing in the brush. Hadn't been deer. It hadn't been some clumsy bear. Something had been following me. And the spiders, they weren't blocking me in. They weren't trying to trap me. They were creating a line, something not to be crossed. A boundary, not for me, but for something else. I know how crazy that sounds. I've told myself all the rational explanations. That I was exhausted. That I imagined the coordination. That it was coincidence. That spiders don't behave that way. But I saw what I saw. More than once. I looked into it later. There's no known species of spider in that area that shows group behavior like that. Nothing even close. Spiders are solitary. They don't form patterns. They don't circle people in the night. I've gone on plenty of hikes since then, camped all over, but I've never gone back to Shasta Trinity. Never stepped on that trail again. I don't think the spiders meant me harm. Whatever they were doing, whatever instinct or pattern made them behave that way, I don't think it was for my benefit either. I think it was older than that. I think it was something in them that responded to something else out there. Something that followed me. Something that stayed just out of sight. And I think, for those nights at least, they kept it from reaching me. They weren't watching me. They were guarding me from whatever was behind the trees. And I don't ever want to know what it was. I never believed in anything like spirits, guardian animals, or strange signs from the natural world. I still don't, not really. But something happened years ago on a hike that I've never been able to explain. And while it wasn't supernatural, it changed the way I feel about silence, wilderness, and the little creatures we often ignore. It started in the spring of 2017. I was 28, in decent shape, and in one of those weird mental states where you want to test yourself physically because you're not doing well emotionally. I'd gone through a hard breakup, I wasn't sleeping well, and I had stopped talking to most of my friends. I told myself that a solo hiking trip would be a way to reset, walk until my brain shut off, and maybe come back feeling better. I picked a trail in the Pacific Northwest that ran for miles through old forests and valleys. It wasn't an official national park, but part of a region filled with logging roads and unmaintained paths. I planned to go out for 5 days, camping on the trail, no contact with anyone. I didn't post anything online. I didn't leave a detailed route. I just told my neighbor I'd be gone for about a week, packed up my gear, and drove out there. The trailhead was empty when I got there. It was one of those clear mornings where everything feels fresh but still a bit damp. The kind of morning where the air smells like pine needles and moss. I started hiking with a full pack, tent, food, water filters, layers, a knife, first aid, flashlight, the usual. It felt good to be out there alone at first. Just the sound of my boots on dirt, the creak of my straps, and the occasional bird call. The first 2 days were normal. I hiked around 12 miles each day, stopping to make camp near a stream both nights. I didn't see anyone else on the trail. The only sign of people I passed was a beer can wedged into a tree hollow and a busted old boot left near the base of a log. It was peaceful but quiet in a way that didn't always sit right with me. It was like the forest was waiting for something. No wind, no small animals rustling in the underbrush. On the third day, I went off the main trail. It wasn't a big detour, just a narrow side path I spotted that looked like it might lead to a higher ridge. I wanted a better view, and the map I had showed some old fire roads up there that could reconnect me later. The side trail was rough and steep, with roots everywhere, but I liked the challenge. It made me focus on my footing instead of my thoughts. After about 2 hours of climbing, I started to feel strange. Not tired, not scared, just watched. I kept glancing over my shoulder even though I hadn't heard anything behind me. My ears were tuned in, like I was waiting to catch a noise that never came. Still, I kept moving forward. Eventually, I reached a clearing where the trees opened up, and I could see the ridges in the distance. I dropped my pack, sat on a rock, and took a long drink of water. There were spider webs all around the area, across shrubs, between tree trunks, on low branches. Not big webs, just thin, messy ones like those spun by little ground spiders. I didn't think much of it. Spring meant insects, and insects meant spiders. Then I noticed one crawling along the edge of my backpack. It was small, maybe the size of a fingernail, black with skinny legs. I flicked it off and zipped the pack. A second spider was near my boot. I shook it off too. I stood up to stretch, and that's when I saw more of them. Not just near my gear, but coming out from under leaves, from cracks in the rock, from the edges of old logs. All around me, not thousands or anything, but too many to be a coincidence. A dozen, maybe more, all heading toward where I had been sitting. I backed away slowly. I wasn't scared of spiders, but something about the way they were moving made me uneasy. They weren't scattering like they usually do when disturbed. They were converging, slowly, steadily. I left the clearing and moved back toward the trail I had come up from. I didn't run. I just walked quickly, trying not to overthink it. But that feeling of being watched came back stronger. I started noticing more spider webs along the trail. Some of them were freshly spun. Thin lines connecting branches at eye level where there hadn't been anything an hour ago. I ducked under one, walked through another. My skin started to itch even though I knew there was nothing crawling on me. The hairs on my neck stood up. I made it down the ridge and back onto the main trail. I felt better for a while. The woods looked normal again. The air was cooler and there was more light filtering through the trees. I found a stream, refilled my bottles, and set up camp early that evening. That night, I woke up around 2 a.m., sweating. Not because I was hot, but because I'd had the same image over and over in my sleep. A ring of spiders moving slowly around me as I lay still in my bag, just pacing in a circle. No sound, no aggression, just waiting. When I sat up, I instinctively reached for my flashlight and scanned the area around my tent. Nothing. I unzipped the flap and checked outside. That's when I saw them. 8 or 9 spiders, small and black, motionless on the ground in a loose arc about 5 feet away from the tent entrance. They weren't moving toward me. They weren't climbing anything, just sitting there. I zipped the flap again and stayed awake for hours. The next morning, they were gone. No trace, no webs, no tracks. I packed up and moved fast that day, putting in almost 20 miles just to clear my head. I tried telling myself it was coincidence, that spiders are everywhere and I just started noticing them because I was already on edge. That's all. But then something happened the next day that shook me in a very different way. I was hiking through a narrow stretch of trail with thick trees on both sides. It was late afternoon, and I was tired, hungry, and trying to reach a clearing marked on my map. The trail turned sharply downhill at one point, and I slipped. It wasn't a bad fall, but I twisted my ankle hard enough to drop me. I cursed, sat in the dirt, and checked it. It was swelling fast. Not broken, but bad enough that walking would be slow and painful. As I was sitting there, breathing heavy and trying to decide whether to keep moving or camp right there, I felt something on my hand. I looked down. A spider. Same size, same color. Just sitting on my skin. I shook it off and noticed two more on my leg. Another on my boot. I pushed myself up using a tree and limped forward. Then I saw what was ahead. A fallen tree, broken at both ends, just off the trail. It looked solid, like a good place to sit, maybe rest. But scattered all around it were small pieces of old fabric, sun-bleached and torn. A ripped glove, part of a sock, a crushed aluminum pan, bent out of shape, and bones. Not a whole skeleton, just fragments. Femur, maybe, part of a jaw. I froze. I looked around slowly and saw more spiders now. Dozens, moving through the leaves and across the broken branches. Not toward the bones. Away from them. I turned and limped away, heart pounding, ignoring the pain in my ankle. I walked for over an hour before stopping. I didn't know if the bones were human or animal, but I wasn't about to stick around and find out. That night I camped near a creek, ankle elevated, wrapped in a compression bandage. I still had 2 days to go before reaching the trailhead, but I knew I'd make it, even if I had to crawl. I didn't sleep. I just watched the dark and listened. But this time, I didn't see any spiders. The next morning, when I rolled up my sleeping pad, there were no webs, no movement, nothing. They were gone. I limped the rest of the way out over 2 days. No more sightings, no more dreams, just cold, sore walking and an overwhelming need to get back to my car. I drove home in silence. I never told anyone the full story. I mentioned the injury. I said I'd overdone it and had some bad weather. That was enough for most people. But sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment and it's quiet, I think back to that ring of spiders. I never asked for them. I never expected anything from them. But I wonder now, were they trying to tell me something? Warn me? Maybe that's all they were. Not guardians, not protectors, just small, watchful creatures that noticed something before I did. Maybe they didn't save me, but maybe they gave me just enough reason to turn around, to keep moving, to not rest in the wrong place at the wrong time. Sometimes people joke and ask me if I've ever tried to summon them again. My guardian spiders. I laugh it off, say I must have hit my head too hard out there. But truth is, I don't want to, because if they ever came back, I think I'd know one thing for sure. Something bad was about to happen again. And this time, I might not be lucky enough to get away. I had been traveling alone through South America for a few weeks, trying to clear my head and take a break from the noise of life back home. I wasn't running from anything dramatic, but everything had started to feel numb, routine, gray. Same alarm clock, same faces, same tiny apartment in a city I didn't care about anymore. The trip wasn't supposed to fix me, just remind me that the world was bigger than my problems. I spent a few days in Brazil, mostly sticking to towns and cities. Eventually, I ended up near a region known for its thick forests and rough trails. Not quite the Amazon, but close enough to feel wild. I met a man in town who told me about an old logging road that cut into dense forest and eventually disappeared into an old growth area. It wasn't marked on official maps anymore, he said, but it was still there if you knew where to look. I didn't catch everything he said. His English was broken and my Portuguese was worse, but I understood enough. So, I packed a day's worth of food, water, first aid, and my old military-style sleeping mat just in case I wanted to stay out overnight. I had done plenty of hikes alone before: Utah, British Columbia, even a stretch of the Appalachian Trail. This one didn't seem that different. Dense, wet jungle, long stretches of silence, high heat, heavy air, and nothing but your own breathing to keep you company. Took me 3 hours on foot from the edge of town just to find the path. Overgrown, mostly hidden, but still there. A worn gap between trees, the suggestion of something human-made, long abandoned, pulled me in. The light thinned as the canopy grew thick overhead, filtering the sun into a constant dim green. The air clung to my skin, and I was soaked with sweat within the first hour. I followed the path as best I could, but it kept vanishing under roots and ferns. I wasn't worried about getting lost yet. I had a compass and I was dropping markers every quarter mile, but something about the forest felt heavy, like it wanted me to move slower. Bugs hovered in clouds that clung to my face and neck. The trees were massive, rough-skinned and tangled with vines. There was almost no wind. The stillness reminded me of a closed room, sealed and untouched. Around mid-afternoon, I came to a break in the trees where the ground dipped into a shallow basin. At the center was a fallen tree, huge, rotting, half covered in moss. It looked like a decent place to rest. I sat down slowly, peeled off my pack, and leaned forward to stretch. My shirt was stuck to my back, my thighs were shaking, and my water was already halfway gone. I listened to the hum of insects, the distant creak of trees moving slightly under their own weight, the slow, steady drip of moisture from the canopy above. Then I noticed something strange. Movement on the ground around my boots. Not ants, not beetles, spiders, big ones. They didn't rush or scatter. They walked with intention, legs high and slow like they were navigating each surface with care. Their bodies were thick, brownish-black, with long, curved legs and a wide stance. I froze. I knew what they were. Brazilian wandering spiders. I'd seen them in pictures before, read warnings about them in travel books and online forums. One of the most aggressive and venomous spiders in the world. Not the kind that spin webs and wait for prey. They wander, they go hunting, and now they were around me. 4 of them, then 6, then more, slowly emerging from the edges of the basin. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe deep. They weren't running at me. They weren't attacking. They were spreading out, almost like they were forming a loose ring around the fallen log. Some stopped and lifted their front legs slightly, a posture I knew meant they were on alert or trying to appear larger. It wasn't a good sign. I scanned the ground. There were more of them coming in from the tree line. I counted at least 15. Some climbed over mossy stones, others walked between ferns, all of them staying low and controlled. I felt like my heart was in my throat, stuck between panic and the need to stay absolutely still. I had no idea what had drawn them to me. No food, no movement, just me sitting there. Then something even stranger happened. Almost as one, they all stopped. Every single spider. They froze in place, legs extended, heads turned slightly toward me. For a full 10 seconds, nothing moved. The forest felt like it was holding its breath. And then, they turned. One by one, the spiders rotated in place. Smooth, deliberate, slow. They turned away from me and began walking back the way they came. Not panicked, not fleeing, just leaving. Every single one of them. I didn't understand. It was like they had come close enough, gotten a look, and decided I wasn't worth the trouble. Or maybe something else had spooked them. I waited a long time before I moved. When I finally stood up, my legs were shaking. I backed away from the log slowly, scanning the undergrowth for any signs of movement. The spiders were gone. Just like that, I hiked out of the basin and back onto the overgrown trail. I didn't stop again. I didn't eat. I didn't even drink more than a few sips of water. I just walked, one foot in front of the other, pushing deeper into the woods until the sun started to drop behind the trees. I made camp on a dry patch near a shallow stream. The air was thick with moisture, and my body ached. I didn't light a fire. I didn't cook anything. I just lay on my mat, half covered in a tarp, staring at the space between branches above me. I kept thinking about the way they had moved, organized, coordinated, almost like they'd come to check me, and then made a decision. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined legs creeping over my sleeping bag, brushing against my skin. I'd twitch awake in a panic, slap at my chest or neck, only to find nothing there. The forest never stopped humming, and I never felt alone. The next morning, I decided to head back. I didn't want to push farther into that forest. Not after what I'd seen. My ankle was sore, My legs were shot, and I was still half dehydrated. I retraced my steps, marked trees, and dropped more tape as I went, hoping I hadn't missed any crucial turn. But as the sun climbed higher, I started to notice something I hadn't expected. Webs. Not big ones, nothing like a tarantula or a huge orb weaver, but small, ground-level webs spun low between branches and rocks, almost invisible unless the light hit them just right. I saw one, then another, then more, dozens, hundreds, all just a few inches above the forest floor, like lines drawn by hand in every direction. They weren't there 2 days ago. I stepped carefully over them, boots barely missing the silk strands. And every time I did, I caught the faintest movement nearby, a flicker of brown legs disappearing under leaves or between bark. They weren't chasing me, they weren't surrounding me, but they were there, watching. By mid-afternoon, I made it to the edge of the forest. My clothes were soaked. My skin was sticky with sweat, mud, and bug bites. My nerves were shot. I didn't stop until I was clear of the tree line and back on dry, open ground. When I finally reached the small town, I didn't speak to anyone. I went straight to my rented room, washed the dirt off in cold water, and lay on the bed for an hour without moving. I never told anyone about it. Not really. People make jokes now and then when I tell them I went hiking in Brazil. Some guy once said, "So, did you summon your spider guardians while you were there?" Like it was some stupid joke about nature spirits or something. I laughed it off, but I didn't correct him. Because here's the thing. I don't believe in guardian spirits. I don't believe in magic. I don't believe in being chosen. But I do believe in instinct, in ecosystems, in patterns. Something that day told those spiders to get close, to surround me, to measure me somehow. And something made them turn away. Maybe it was scent. Maybe I was covered in something they didn't like. Maybe I didn't smell like prey. Or maybe I resembled something else, some kind of predator or threat or signal that made them leave. All I know is they could have bitten me. I'd have been dead within hours, deep in a jungle nobody maps anymore. No cell service, no help, no rescue. But they didn't. They came, they watched, and then they walked away. I took a trip to Hawaii in the summer of 2018. It wasn't planned around anything big, just a long overdue break from work and some stress that had been stacking up for months. At the time, I was working a job I didn't like in a city that made me feel boxed in, and I thought the ocean would help clear some of that weight. I booked the trip a couple weeks out, picked the big island, and told myself I'd try to keep it simple, just hiking, being outside, and staying away from crowds. I stayed in a cheap little room inland for the first couple nights, but I didn't go there to stay indoors. After some quick research and a look over my gear, I packed up and headed toward the coast with my backpack, hoping to hike along the shore and maybe sleep out near one of the beaches. I had camped before, plenty of times, but I had never camped in Hawaii, and definitely not near the ocean. The beach I picked was quiet, not completely isolated, but far enough away from any resort or town that you could go hours without seeing another person. There were signs nailed to the palm trees along the trail as I walked in. Big, white, sun-faded signs with black lettering. "No camping on the beach. Fine enforced." That kind of thing. I figured it was more about keeping the tourists in line or maybe some local rules about fire safety or wildlife. I'd seen similar signs in places that still had people camping anyway. I wasn't planning on building a fire or trashing anything. I just wanted to be alone for one night with the sound of the waves. It was beautiful when I got there. White sand stretched down the shoreline. Jagged black rock formations pushed out into the water like something pulled up from deep underground. Palm trees creaked in the breeze. The waves were soft, more like a steady hush than the crashing I'd expected. It was peaceful in a way that didn't even feel real. I picked a spot farther up near a dune line where the sand met some brush and light vegetation. The sun was going down. There was nobody around. It felt like the world had backed off for a while and left me to breathe. I laid out my gear. A simple roll mat, a sleeping bag, a small tarp. I kept my backpack zipped and tucked up against a rock in the sand, and I changed into lighter clothes, shorts, t-shirt, bare feet. I made a quick cold dinner from snacks I'd packed, trail mix, dried fruit, beef jerky. The light faded, the stars came out, and the sound of the ocean smoothed everything into one long, quiet wave. That night, I didn't even use the tent. I figured with no rain in the forecast, I could just sleep under the stars. I left the rain fly rolled and open, climbed into the sleeping bag, and lay on my back with the zipper down low and my arms free. I drifted off to sleep easily, lulled by the wind and the faint salt smell in the air. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but I woke up fast. Not the kind of slow, dreamy wake-up where your eyes flutter open. It was like my body went from deep sleep to full alert in 1 second. I felt something on my leg. Then I felt it move. Not the brush of wind, not sand. Something heavier, something crawling. I didn't react at first. I was still half asleep, brain fogged. But then it moved again, across my thigh. Big, fast, not a twitch, a full body scuttle. I sat up fast and reached for my flashlight, my hands shaking. I clicked it on and pointed it into the sleeping bag. I froze. They were everywhere. Big cockroaches. The kind you hear about in tropical places but hope you never have to see. Glossy brown, as long as my middle finger, with those long, twitching antennae and spiny legs. They were inside the sleeping bag, crawling across the fabric, up my legs, under my shirt. I could see one coming out from the bottom of the bag like it had been inside for a while. I shouted, not words, just a noise, and launched myself out of the bag. I kicked it away from me, sending a few of the roaches flying across the sand. I jumped to my feet, brushing myself off, slapping at my legs, stomach, back, anywhere I felt movement. My skin felt like it was on fire. I stood there, panting, the flashlight beam shaking in my hand, watching as the bag twisted on the ground and more of the insects spilled out. Some darted into the sand. Others crawled toward the brush. A few just sat there, still, like they weren't in any rush. I don't have a phobia of bugs. I've seen plenty of roaches in apartments and cities. But these were different. These weren't the kind that dart out from under a cabinet and vanish. These were bold, big, quiet, and they had been all over me. I grabbed my backpack and yanked it open. No sign of them inside. I kept my clothes sealed in a dry bag, thankfully. But I checked everything anyway, shook every pocket, emptied the whole pack out onto the sand. The mat and tarp were clean. I left the sleeping bag flipped open and used a stick to turn it inside out. A few dead ones dropped out. My stomach turned. I wasn't sure if I'd squashed them in my sleep or if they had died while hiding inside. Either option made me feel sick. I didn't lie down again. I stayed up the rest of the night sitting on the rock with my knees pulled up, the flashlight in one hand, my sandals in the other. I kept scanning the ground. They didn't come back right away, but I saw a few more moving around the brush, slow and steady. They didn't seem scared of the light. The stars above didn't look peaceful anymore. They just looked far away, uninterested. The moment the sky started to shift from black to gray, I packed everything. I didn't bother trying to clean the sleeping bag. I just stuffed it into its sack and lashed it to the outside of the pack. I hiked out with stiff legs and tired eyes. When I got back to town, I found a small outdoor sink near a public restroom and hosed down every piece of gear. I tossed the sleeping bag into a dumpster. No way was I keeping it. I even considered throwing out the backpack, but ended up keeping it after a full rinse and scrub. That night, I stayed in a small rental with tile floors, ceiling fans, and nothing that crawled. I took a long shower and sat on the edge of the bed for nearly an hour, still half expecting something to brush my leg or crawl across my back. My skin felt like it was buzzing. The next day, I looked up the area I'd camped in and read that certain parts of the beach were known for massive roach activity, especially during warmer nights. They nested in the brush, the sand, even the palm trees. At night, they wandered across the beach for food or warmth. People had written about it online. There were warnings. That's what the signs were for, partly the law, partly a heads up. Don't sleep out there. Don't leave food. Don't invite the night in. I learned a hard lesson, not about cockroaches, about ignoring signs, about thinking I was separate from nature. I thought I could just lay my head down anywhere the sky was open and the ground was soft. But nature doesn't care what you want it to be. It doesn't care about your peace or your mood or your need for silence. It does what it's always done. The beach wasn't mine that night. It was theirs. And I'll never forget the feeling of waking up and realizing I wasn't alone. Not even close. They were already there, and I never heard them coming. I used to think the wilderness was easy to understand. I thought if you had the right gear, a good map, and some common sense, there wasn't much that could catch you off guard. Nature has rules, after all, patterns, logic. I always figured it was people who made things messy, but I've learned that's not true. Nature can be just as messy, not in the way people are, but in how it doesn't care if you make a mistake. It won't correct you. It just waits for you to figure out whether you did it right or wrong. And if you didn't, you'll know. This story happened to me in the fall of 2021. I had taken a solo hiking trip up to a remote range in central Idaho, somewhere between the Payette National Forest and the Bitterroots. I wasn't on any famous trail, just a path I had stitched together from old logging roads, marked ridgelines, and a few recommended segments from a hiking forum I followed. That forum was where things started to go sideways, although I didn't know it at the time. There was a user on the forum named Pathmind who shared a route called Clearwater Run. I thought the name sounded familiar, probably just another name for a well-known stream or drainage. I downloaded the GPX file and checked the notes. It was labeled as intermediate difficulty, lightly trafficked, mostly forest with a small rocky stretch and some possible wildlife sightings. His last note read, "Make sure to stay to the right when you pass the burned-out cabin around mile 9. After that, it's a straight shot to Clearwater Spring." Simple. At least it looked that way. The only thing I misread at the time was the phrase, Clearwater Spring. I thought it was just describing the quality of the spring, like clear water that happens to be from a spring. I didn't realize it was actually Clearwater Spring. One word, a named location. It sounds small, I know. A space between two words. But in this case, that space meant I misunderstood the destination entirely. And it almost cost me everything. I parked off an old Forest Service road and started out early. The trail was overgrown but walkable, and I made good time the first day. The leaves were turning, but the weather was still mild. I passed through a few ridges that gave me a good view of the valleys below, then dropped into dense forest where the ground was soft with pine needles. That night, I camped beside a small dry creek bed and slept without trouble. On day 2, I reached the burned-out cabin. It was exactly like the trail notes said, charred beams, half a rusted stove, the skeletal frame of a porch. The place had clearly been abandoned for years, maybe decades. I stood there for a bit, staring at it. There was a strange feeling to it, not spooky, just hollow. I didn't go inside. I remembered the note, "Stay to the right at the cabin." That's where I messed up, because from where I was standing, 2 trails forked out ahead. One slightly to the right, clearly more traveled, with faded blue tape tied to a branch. The other curved farther right, so far it almost looked like it wasn't a trail at all. Just a thinning in the underbrush with barely visible boot prints and no markers. I figured stay to the right meant the one that was slightly off the main fork. But my head, already primed by the name Clearwater Spring, told me to keep following the creek bed. After all, clear water tends to follow downhill. A spring would bubble up near a stream, right? So I followed the left fork, not even realizing I had just ignored the right turn entirely. For the first few miles, it still felt like trail. There were trees cleared, faint signs of foot traffic. But after another hour, things started to fade. The trail thinned. The ground got soft and uneven. I was bushwhacking more than hiking now, pushing through shrubs, stepping over down trees. But I kept telling myself it was fine. Maybe the forum was outdated. Maybe this was one of those wild trails that only locals used. I still had the GPX file, after all, and the map was showing a slow arc back toward where I figured Clearwater Spring must be. I kept going. By early afternoon, my water was low, and I hadn't passed a stream in miles. The map showed something ahead, a low depression where runoff might collect. I pushed harder, climbing over a low hill and down the other side, only to find nothing. No water, just dry leaves, rocks, and silence. I sat down and pulled out my phone. No signal, obviously. The GPS was lagging, drifting across the screen. I took a deep breath, drank the last of my water, and decided I'd turn around. It was a mistake, but I still had time to backtrack and correct it. That's when I heard the first sound. A rustling, light but sharp, maybe 20 feet to my left. I froze. It wasn't a branch falling. It was footsteps, controlled, measured, like someone or something was pacing me through the woods. I waited a full minute before moving. My heart had started to thud in my chest, slow but heavy. I turned back the way I came, only to find the trail already gone. The direction I had entered from was swallowed by trees and brush, like it had closed behind me. I scanned for landmarks, looked for my boot prints, anything. But the forest floor was carpeted with loose leaves and pine needles. Every direction looked the same. I tried walking straight back using my compass. 20 minutes passed, then 30. I still didn't recognize anything. No cabin, no clearing, just dense forest and the distant echo of branches moving in ways they shouldn't. The sound came again, not close, but not far. Behind me, always just a little off-center. A broken stick, a shuffle, something following at a careful distance. I didn't stop again. I walked harder, faster, until my legs were burning. My mouth was dry. I hadn't eaten since morning. I pulled out a granola bar and ate it while walking, barely tasting it. As the sun dropped, the light in the woods turned strange, thin and amber, filtered through tall trees. I knew I needed to stop before it got dark. I picked the first flat spot I could find, threw down my tarp, and set up the tent. I didn't cook. I didn't unpack anything but my sleeping bag and knife. That night, I lay in the dark, sweating, listening, and I heard it again. Footsteps, circling, slow, sometimes closer, sometimes farther. I didn't sleep. At first light, I was already packed and moving. My feet hurt, my lips were cracked. I had no water left, and now I knew I was far off trail. I used the compass to aim southwest, hoping to intersect the main path again. I walked for hours. The woods got thicker. The trees grew taller and older, their trunks blackened and damp. Everything was wet and rotten. No signs of life, no birds, no animals, just silence. And behind me always something, watching. I never saw it, but I knew it was there, just beyond the trees, staying quiet when I stopped, moving when I moved. It wasn't a ghost, not some shadow creature. I think it was a person, or people. I don't know why, but something was there tracking me, not helping, not chasing, just there. By the afternoon of the third day, I found water, barely a trickle coming down a mossy rock face. I filtered it, drank until I nearly threw up, and kept moving. My legs were shaking. My ankles were covered in scrapes. My shirt was soaked through. That night, I didn't make camp. I just lay under a tree, wrapped in the tarp, knife in hand. And again, I heard them, steps, crackling leaves. At one point, I swore I heard breathing, but I stayed still, eyes open, muscles locked. When morning came, the forest looked the same, still endless, still closed off. But I forced myself to walk again, and after hours of wandering, I saw it. Blue tape, tied to a branch, the real trail, the right fork. I had looped back somehow, coming in from a bad angle. My legs nearly gave out. I dropped to my knees, breathing hard, staring at that strip of plastic like it was a lifeline. I followed it for 6 more miles before I saw the outline of my truck through the trees. I didn't look back. I drove until I hit pavement, then kept going until I reached a gas station with fluorescent lights and the sound of cars and people. Later, when I pulled up the GPX again, I saw the truth. I'd taken the wrong fork. Clearwater Spring wasn't just a description. It was Clearwater Spring. Place. One word. The kind of mistake anyone could make. A space between 2 words. That's all it took. A little gap. And in that space, I got lost. And in that space, something found me. I never went back. And I don't hike alone anymore. Because I know what's out there. Not ghosts, not monsters, but something worse. something patient, something that waits, just on the other side of a mistake.